I just also want to give you one last tip is to create an organized binder. I was able to create a binder where I have, oh, like my dad, his picture, birth certificates and records and all of these things I keep in here, and I put it in date and chronological order so that I can know the dates and times so that it really does tell a story, which is pretty cool when you start to flip through and look at all your research and you can actually tell your own story.
The More Movement Crew.
Welcome to the More Movement Crew podcast. This is episode 5 of season 2, and I'm your host, Kanina Porter. So today we're going to talk about an exciting topic, and that is ancestry. I actually created my vision board this year. It's 2020. So I wanted to do something that would help me to discover more about who I am. As you grow and you get older, you want to know where you come from, about the people that came before you. And so a part of my vision board I wrote is to do some research on my ancestry. And so I started in 2019 and I had been doing it for a couple of months, but 2020 is when pieces started to come together. And so I'm excited to talk about some of the things that I was able to discover, some of the tips that I was able to gain while doing the research. And I want to share those with you if you decide that you want to start looking into your ancestry. But before I get started, I wanted to share a quote by Marcus Garvey. And it is, "A people without the knowledge of their past history and origin and culture is like a tree without roots." And so when we know where we come from, we know our history, it kind of makes us whole. It helps us to understand why we do the things we do, why we behave, why we look the way that we look. And it kind of helps us to kind of solve some of the missing pieces. I think a lot of times, particularly African-American families, there are stories that are passed down orally through generations. And sometimes those stories are accurate. Sometimes those stories are not. Sometimes we don't have a lot of the pieces from our ancestors because of slavery. And so we are passing down what we know, if anything at all. And so that is why it's so important to do this research, because you want to know where you come from. You want to know something about your people. And when I did that, I started to discover so much. I decided I wanted to do ancestry research on both sides. So it's a pretty ambitious goal, but it's me, right? I have to go hard or go home. So I decided I wanted to do my mother's side and my father's side. And particularly my research is looking at the paternal lineage, the men on both of those sides. So following the last name all the way through. And so that was my goal. And I would like to say I was pretty successful at it. I'm still figuring out some pieces, but I had some exciting things that like some kind of breakthroughs that have came forward with it. But I want to go ahead and get started on the 10 tips for ancestry research. So it's kind of overwhelming to know where to start. A lot of people are thinking, I don't want to have to pay for a service. I don't want to have to spend all this money to research my ancestry. But it's not actually the case. And as I started getting more into it, I discovered that. So initially, just the idea, what made me decide to do the research and what kind of helped me to kind of determine like where I wanted to start is I looked at, I did an ancestry DNA test just to do it. It was like a Christmas special. And I was like, a friend of mine, she said she had done hers. And so I was like, I'm going to do mine. So I just did 23andMe. Quick ancestry, and I got back my results, and I was like super excited to get my results back. And when I got them back, they just were pretty basic. It just said that I'm like 84% West African and I'm like 29% Nigerian. And then it kind of showed the other countries, but Nigerian was kind of the largest percentage. I also had some East Asian in my DNA, and I had, of course, European in my DNA. I think it was like 13%. And so that is kind of what it showed me. So I knew that both my mother's side and my father's side probably both were from West Africa and descendants of West Africa, because that was the hugest part of my DNA. It's 84%. So I'm 84% African. So that was exciting to know that, my ancestors did come from West Africa. But of course, that just wasn't enough. I was like, okay, what's next? So I started to do the research. I started to talk to my mother and father and talk to some family. And I was able to kind of get names. That is the most important thing you could do. That's the first tip to starting your ancestry search. You need names. And so when I say names, you need the first and last name of your grandfather, the first and last name of your grandmother. And if you're doing both sides, you need both, right? And so when you have their like official names, that will help your search to be so much easier. And make sure you can find the right spelling. So for my grandfather, his name was Ralos. And so it's spelled so many different ways in the documents. And so it kind of made it a little difficult to find him. So I had to just use variations of his name. And so I was able to find things, because I knew his first and last name. And I also knew his wife's first and last name. And so that helped me. So know names. If you can't ask anything else, if they don't know anything else, see if you can get names. If you can get names, you can start your search for sure. Okay, the second thing I say is start with familysearch.org. That is free, and it's kind of like Ancestry. Ancestry kind of gives you more information, but at least familysearch.org will allow you to create an account for free and to search for documents. And so that I found to be a lifesaver when, I was going to go through these paid services, and I did Ancestry for a little bit. I just did like the trial, and some of the same documents I found on Ancestry, I was able to find on familysearch.org. So create a familysearch.org account and just start looking around, but you gotta have names. And you also need to probably have their place of residence, would be really, really beneficial. So it gives you a lot of options to filter, but at least those two things you're gonna need to know. Name for sure. So that was the second thing, is to go to familysearch.org. The third thing is what you need to start looking for. So I'm going to do each type of document step by step. So the first document, which I found to be super helpful, was looking at death certificates. When people die, a lot of times, more than likely, they have to record their death. And that's when you're talking about after 1870-ish, you'll probably be able to find death records. But anything before 1870, you're probably not going to find it. And depending on where they live, you may still not find it that far ago. But if it's within the last 20, 30, 40 years, you should be able to find death certificates. And so what I thought was super helpful is when I was able to find a death certificate of my grandfather and my great grandmother and things like that, you can see on the death certificate their names, their spouses, and their fathers and mothers, and where their father and mother are from. And so it helps you to connect the next step or the next piece. So I was able to look at their death certificate. I was able to say, okay, this is their father. Oh, okay, so that's my great grandmother and great grandfather's name. And this is where they're from. So now you have a place where they resided. So now you have a location, if it's not the location of the person that passed away. So it helps you to kind of put those pieces together so you can move on to the next step and to the next step. So that was tip number 3, death certificates. Tip number 4 is marriage certificates, which I just think those are the coolest things, just to see people when they were first in love. It shows the ages. I know on a lot of my marriage certificates for my ancestors has like race, and it has like colored on there, which is crazy to see. There's like 18, they're at 18 or 20 years old. So they're super young. So it kind of takes you to that time where you can see like how they, like at what age they fell in love and how they did it and where they did it. So that's really cool. I love finding marriage certificates. I just think that they're cool. So finding marriage certificates also has parent information, because you have to have a witness so you can see who witnessed it, where it took place, what time, what date, what year, all of that on that document. And I also like to save all of the documents. So if you find something, then save the document and create a folder and keep it organized, because it helps to tell your story. So that's the 4th tip, marriage certificates. The 5th tip is Census Records. Now, African Americans typically do not show up in the census, the United States Census, until after 1870, because slavery, 1865. So then you got a couple of years and they start actually recording us as people, which is crazy. It's crazy. Just the idea that we weren't recognized as people and we were recognized as properties and logged just like you would a warehouse is so disheartening. It's like it just struck me to the core to realize that my ancestors weren't even recognized as people. So they didn't officially exist on paper until 1870, unless they were free already, then they would already be listed on some kind of document. So 1870 is when the census records typically existed for African Americans, when you want to find who was in the household and the ages of those who are in the household. And once you find those, are really cool because they're really old documents, but you can see the names of the head of the household, the wife, and the children, and whoever was living with them in their age. So that was really cool. So census records are really helpful because it helps you to confirm who was really married to who and who the children were. And so I also use those census records to kind of keep and to document as well. So save those too. So the sixth resource is you can start to search for slave schedules. So for me, I hit kind of a block when I got to when I got to the 1870s. Obviously, my ancestors disappeared. I couldn't find any more information on them. Well, that's because they were slaves. And so I had to look at slave schedules. Now, there are slave schedules. They were required to report on how many slaves you had. Just like when you do an inventory, you have to calculate how many slaves you had. So there's no way to track the slaves' names, more likely, but you're able to track where they were there. If you can track down the plantation's name or the slave masters, then you can look at the log and you can see that there is an African-American boy, or it says N, probably for Negro, boy that is 3 years old or 4 years old. And that is the only way that we would be able to really track, like, if one of our ancestors was on that plantation. So there's really no way to know that particular person was there. But if you can begin to track their place of residence, and then you can track the plantation they were at, you can look for that particular slave master. And then when you find the slave master, you can look at his slave schedule. I know it's a lot, and you're like, whoa, this is like being a historian. And I am by no means a historian, but as you learn, as you obtain the knowledge, you want to dig deeper and you want to learn more. And so that's how I was able to do that. And so I was able to try to track the plantation and then track the slave owner of that property and then find the list. So I believe that I found my 5th generation grandmother at one of those plantations, but I'm kind of stuck there. So I have a couple family members that I've been able to connect with through the 23andMe Ancestry. And so we connected and she reached out to me. And so she helped me to kind of confirm the pieces that I had put together and helped me to figure out that piece at the very end. So we're still doing our research. We're still trying to figure it out. She's done so much more work than I have, but it was great to know that her research matched mine and it kind of confirmed that I was at least moving in the right direction. So slave schedules, if you're like me and you're like, I need to know how this started. I need to know from the very, very beginning. I need to get as far as I can. And that's how I was able to do that. So I'm still working on looking into the research historically as to specifically what country my ancestors came from West Africa. I know that certain plantations like to have certain slaves from certain parts of Africa. If you were a peanut farmer, if you were doing cotton, if you were doing sugarcane. So there's certain African countries where they were already doing that. That's where they learned it from, obviously. So you want slaves that can do that same work and make you money. And so that is kind of how you can track where your ancestors came from. So there's just a lot of things that doing the research you will learn in this process. So that was number 6, the slave schedules. Then number 7, there is a free resource that I believe it's federal. Yeah, it's a government website, and it's archives.org, and it has some slave narratives, and it also has some slave schedule information. There's just a lot of resources in archives.gov. You may get a little bit like confused. There's so much stuff. I really hadn't been able to dig through it, but it's a free resource. It's a government organization, so it may help you to expand your research aside from just looking at like your local information and just names. So the National Archives, and it's just archives.gov if you want to look for some more information on Ancestry. All right, so that was number 7. Number 8 is your local library. So I discovered this one summer when I was working with a nonprofit organization, and we took the students to go learn about their ancestry, and they were able to use the library's computers to get on Ancestry.com for free. So there are certain libraries that have access to Ancestry.com, and they will allow you to use those to do your research. You probably got to have a library card, so make sure you have a library card. But that's a free resource that you don't have to pay for. You can use the library version of Ancestry.com. And I'm sure there's other local resources as well. If I find any more, I'll add them to the link of this video. But for the most part, I know that there is one particular library here in the city of Louisville that does have Ancestry.com access. So use your local libraries if you want to do more research. And also the libraries of the places, like if you have an opportunity to go to some places where your ancestors live, you can use those libraries, and those will probably have more information. So I want to talk a little bit more about this later on. And then number 9 is you can do like I did, and you can do a DNA test where you have to pay for it. There's Ancestry DNA test, there's 23andMe, and there's the most expensive one if you're African American, AfricanAncestry.com, which I will be doing next. I just don't know when. And that one will really give me the actual tribe where my ancestors came from. And I'm so excited about that. So that is number 9, is if you want to pay for it, that can be the next step. Because some people just want to do the DNA just to see what comes up. And so that's a good way to do that. The prices range. Sometimes they have specials. I think the special for 23andMe was like $70 or something like that. So just check that out if you want to try that. That's also a good option to kind of give you some factual information on your DNA test. And there's also packages with those. So if you wanted to do just your basic DNA traits, you could do that. If you want to upgrade and do your health ancestry, which is important for some people, you can upgrade and do that. So it just depends on what package you want to do. And then number 10, I kind of mentioned it a little bit in 8, but visit the location of your ancestors. So in April, I will be going to Charleston, South Carolina, to visit some of the sites where my ancestors lived. And I'm so excited about that journey. I will be vlogging the whole entire time, but I'm going to go with some family members, and we're going to visit Charleston. And it's just going to be an experience unlike any other. I'm going to go to the plantation where my ancestors were from, and it's going to help me to discover like what I come from. I know that I come from a generation of amazing people. And so this is going to be my mother's side, which is a huge family. And so maybe this will help to kind of solve some pieces for them too. And it can be a contribution to my family. So I'm just so excited for that. I believe it's going to impact me in such an incredible way and change my life. I know that I come from, with that particular side, of people that are super hospitable. Like that side of the family is always giving, always bringing people in and sharing. And so that is a side of people I come from. And I just want to know how it's all connected. So I will definitely be keeping you guys in touch when I visit Charleston in April, and hoping to do a summer visit for my father's side and a family reunion. So excited. A family reunion, the Porter family reunion. Hopefully we'll get to do that in North Carolina, and that will be that side of my family. So I have managed to meet new relatives through this process. 23andMe has connected me to relatives, and then I was able to connect my father with his cousin that he knew as a child. Shout out to Brooklyn, because that's where they are. We got family in Brooklyn, so I'm excited. I wore my Brooklyn shirt just for y'all. So I'm excited. I'm excited to be able to meet my family and to see my family and to know the kind of people that I come from. And it's so, so important. So those are my 10 tips for ancestry research. So I definitely think that I want to encourage you to check out one of those things. Those 10 tips I gave you, pretty reasonable price. If you want to go the distance and do the DNA test, you can, but you don't have to. Most of the stuff that I put on there is free. So there's no excuse to not try. And to just get the missing pieces. I do know that having these conversations in our family sometimes can bring up things from the past. So be very sensitive when you're having conversations with your family members, because sometimes it brings up a pain that people don't want to remember. Times of segregation and racism and abuse and trauma and abandonment, right? And so we just have to be careful about asking the questions and bringing up old wounds that people may not be ready to discuss. So sometimes if somebody doesn't want to talk about it, then we just have to kind of leave it alone and just do your own research. And when you go to share what you found, be sensitive about that too. And so I just also want to give you one last tip, is to create an organized binder. I was able to create a binder where I have, like my dad, his picture, birth certificates and records and all of these things I keep in here, and I put it in date and chronological order so that I can know the dates and times, so that it really does tell a story, which is pretty cool when you start to flip through and look at all your research and you can actually tell your own story. So that is a good tip for also staying organized and being able to, and you can duplicate that for family members who also want to know, then you can give them a copy. So that is all I have for today. Like I said, I will be doing a vlog in April, and I will share that vlog with you. I'm also going to be doing a vlog next week when I take a trip to Canada. So that is going to be up next. And so I'm so excited about that. But like I said, my vision board, I want to travel more. I want to do research on my ancestry. I want it to be healthy. And that is what I have set out to do. And so I hope that this episode has blessed you. I hope it got you thinking what I want to do and how I want to find out more about where I come from. And if you have any questions or if you have any comments, leave them below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video. Thank you for all of my new subscribers. I saw you. I appreciate you subscribing to my channel. And until next time, be blessed.